Now, if you were looking for something really unexpected to be found in this video, something that nobody ever thought would resurface because nobody believed any copy still existed, I think this topic is the perfect one. It dates all the way back to some of the first lost media videos I ever made, and one that a lot of people have told me got them into lost media. That's the Kelly Toy, Chowder, and Flapjack plushes. These were a collectible anomaly for the fact that nobody even knew they existed in the first place. How the story goes is that they appeared in Kelly Toy's upcoming products catalog in 2010, with prototypes having been seen in their showroom in 2011, but both sets of characters were quietly cancelled and never released. Nobody had any of these or could prove claims that they had been seen in the wild somewhere back in the day. And for the years that followed, I was convinced that all these plushes had either been destroyed or quite simply lost somewhere in an abandoned plush warehouse for no one to ever find. But for the first time, that story changed when earlier this year, the first ever prototype from these series resurfaced, a Flapjack that was purchased on eBay after having been found at an estate sale. While this did give me hope that more of the set could be out there, it did seem like one of those mythical sales that only comes up once or twice ever, having been bought and sold at the right time. But there was another huge find with these plushes that changes the story quite a bit, and adds to the likelihood that there are more out there. In November 2023, I got a message from a viewer of mine who stated they own the Kelly Toy Mung Doll plush. I was so surprised I almost didn't know what to say. It just appeared out of nowhere and was completely legit. It looked exactly like the photo from the catalog and had the Kelly Toy sample tag on it. They explained the backstory behind this plush, having said they actually obtained it 3 to 4 years ago, but didn't know it was lost or desired until having come across my video talking about them. They also explained that it wasn't an eBay purchase like the Flapjack, which is what I had originally thought, but rather it was one in a claw machine. Apparently this machine was located at a Walmart in Georgia, along with a Truffles plush from the same set, though she wasn't one and there's no photo of her in the machine either. While the mystery remains about how exactly these prototype plushes ended up in a claw machine, the only conclusion to reach is that they must have been put there by accident. Claw machine companies source their stock from all over the place, so it's possible the plush had been discarded or traded hands a few times until it was eventually sold as bulk. But even for as interesting as that story is, what's even more unbelievable is that it adds legitimacy to previously debunked claims about these plushes. For years on my original video, I had people claiming they saw Chowders and Flapjacks at local carnivals, more specifically at Carowinds in North Carolina. I always believed these people must have been misremembering. There's no way a prototype could have been found in the wild like that. But now it seems very possible the same situation could have ended up with more of these plushes. And if we push this theory even further, I wonder if any of this has something to do with the fact that Cartoon Network is headquartered in Georgia. We know several of each character were made, so we could definitely end up seeing more of these eventually. But by far, it's the strangest example of prototypes making their way out to the public that I've ever seen. If there's anything that can be said about the toy company Jazzwares, it's that they're kind of controversial only because I know there are diehard fans out there that grew up with Sonic Jazzwares and regard them as one of the greatest Sonic figure lines. And then there are the people like me that really dislike them. Small figures that broke often and were overpriced at Toys R Us, I never really got into the line. But if there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that the plethora of cancelled products and prototypes that have circulated from them is certainly a fan favorite for physical lost media. I remember as far back as the first toy fair they ever showed their Sonic products off at. So many of their products looked way different than what we ended up getting, including the original 2.75-inch figures, which had completely different sculpts and no articulation. But unfortunately, Jazzwares would often melt down materials to reuse them in other projects, especially for those early sculpts. So it's likely they don't exist anymore. But their plushes are another story. Over the years, Jazzwares has shown off a good bunch of prototype plushes that either look way different than the final ones or never came out, including the original pattern for Metal Sonic, and of course the cancelled Big from Pat Mac's collection. However, there was one plush that became even more elusive for the character it represented, and for the fact that we didn't even have a clear photo of it, despite it being seen in Jazzwares' content. This is the legendary classic SuperSoniQ plush that was cancelled and never released, having first been spotted at Jazzwares' Toy Fair booth in 2013. What's unfortunate about this plush, aside from the fact that it was cancelled, is that you can only make out his top spikes in this photo. The rest of him is buried in the plush box, and there are no other shots of it. For years, this is all we had to work with, though later on, a little more of him was revealed, as Jazzwares had planned and cancelled a series of transformable plushes containing SuperSoniQ and Super Shadow. In this poster, their classic SuperSoniQ plush is used to represent the transforming action, but strangely, they chose to steal GE's SuperSoniQ plush to represent the final one, rather than using their own SuperSoniQ. So even in this shot, we can only make out a small piece of his face. And it stayed that way ever since, until December 2022, when the story changed. At the time, a few people sent messages to me and stated that the Jazzwares classic SuperSoniQ plush had resurfaced, almost a decade after first being seen. They referred me to an eBay listing that contained a lot of Sonic plushes, nothing that looks out of the ordinary to the casual eye. But to the right side of the first image, behind two Tails plushes, sits the classic SuperSoniQ. This listing, in a way, is very similar to the Kelly Toy Flapjack plush, in that it appeared without warning, after so much time had passed. But what's very different from the Flapjack is how the listing itself was handled. Like I mentioned before, Flapjack was priced high, and it was clear the seller knew it was a prototype. But with these Sonic plushes, the title was simply stating it was a Sonic plush lot, and the price was reflective of that, only a little more than $100. It seems like the seller had no idea how important and desired the SuperSoniQ really was, but that would kinda line up with our theory about who he is. The listing was posted in Florida, which is where Jazzwares' headquarters is located, so the speculation is that this was a former employee who had left the company, ended up with some stuff, and sold it because they didn't want it anymore. Though it's still not known how exactly they ended up with SuperSoniQ, or if they ever had any other prototypes, and we also don't know who the buyer of this lot was either. I'm guessing we won't ever know unless it ends up trading hands. But that's not to say there couldn't be more in existence. After Pat Mac had bought his Big the Cat plush, we did end up spotting a picture that contained a second one on a Chinese website, proving that more than one copy of these plushes could exist. Whether or not that's the case for SuperSoniQ though, or if we'll ever see it, remains a mystery. One of the most fun aspects of looking into lost media is rediscovering that part of your childhood that became forgotten about or had lost media connected to it, that you had no idea existed back when you were a kid, or even nowadays for that matter. It's a chance to revisit the past and get new content to something that was probably never really intended to be seen by fans of the series. And this topic relates to the classic book series, Captain Underpants. I don't really follow this series or the community surrounding it, but I know it did have a new movie made for it a while ago, and of course, I remember reading the books back in elementary school. They were a lot of fun just with how wacky the concept was, and the flip-o-ramas made me want to keep reading just so I could make it to the next one. But whether you read the book series back in the day or are currently reading it, I'll bet there is one volume of the book you've never read, and probably didn't even know existed. In fact, so few people have ever even seen it, it's almost completely lost, and could stay that way for quite a while longer. This takes us to the early days of the series, 8 years before Captain Underpants even released its first official volume in the late 1990s. The original creation of the character dates back to 1989, when series creator Dave Pilkey wrote the first iteration of what would become Captain Underpants, in this 48-page book titled The Really Cool Adventures of Captain Underpants. In more modern times, this book is seen as a prototype of sorts, a self-published novel that was never intended for a wide release. The project was done entirely by Pilkey himself while he was still a student at Kent State University, and released these books in very limited numbers around local stores in the Kent, Ohio area. They only sold for 10 cents, and all the profits were donated to charity. Now, the majority of this information comes from a Reddit post from 2020 on the Captain Underpants subreddit that, from what I can tell, was the first and only time this novel was even discovered at all, and is where the majority of this information comes from. The Abiding Times, owner of the book, described it as being Xeroxed and hand-stapled, though it looks to be in remarkably good condition over all these years. It was also stated by Abiding Times that their copy is indeed authentic, as they purchased it from one of the bookstores where it was released, back when they themselves were also attending Kent State. Of course, with a discovery as rare and elusive as this, you might be wondering exactly how many copies were made, or who else might have one. While it's not clear how many were made, there is speculation that it couldn't have been a very large amount, due to the fact that it was self-published and handmade. The number of 25 to 50 is thrown out in the Reddit thread, but this is not confirmed. Now, as for getting your hands on a copy, or possibly sourcing another one, it's not known how many still exist, as no other reports of more resurfacing have ever been seen since this original post. The Lost Media Wiki article that talks about this topic also mentioned interest from other users for Abiding Times to scan and release their copy, but this hasn't happened, as according to their Reddit account, they haven't been online since around the time they first made this post. Though if I had to take a guess, I would say even if they were still active, they probably would not release the book's content. Media like this does have some kind of value to the right people, and once scanned, it would lose that value. While I don't necessarily believe in that philosophy, I can understand why owners wouldn't want to share it. In fact, in one of their replies, Abiding Times even mentioned having listed it on eBay to test the market, but there's no word on if they ended up selling it or if the auction even concluded at all. In fact, there was even more speculation in the Lost Media Wiki forums that this whole topic could be an elaborate hoax, for the fact that Dave Pilkey has never mentioned this book anywhere before, and this is the only photo of it on the internet. Personally, I don't think I agree with that theory, as it seems too real to fake, and if the owner never ended up selling it, there would be no point in attaching value to it. Though I suppose you could argue that it was never sold because it was a hoax, and only the cover exists, so there wouldn't be any more content in it. I would love to find that listing if it ever existed, as it might give us some more insight into the book, but for now this is all we have. If any of you guys have come across a copy of this in the wild, you hold some lost media and could be the person who shares more of its content online. While I've talked a lot about lost plushes and merchandise on the channel before, in the past there have been some notable searches involving larger scale items, like the whereabouts of the Mario and Wario puppets that were used at E3, and actually, this topic relates to even more puppets like this. If you were following Gorillaz back during the Phase 2 era, and throughout some of their work on Demon Days, you might have come across videos online showing puppets of 2D and Murdoch talking to each other, joking around, and making speeches. These are actually well-known interpretations of the Gorillaz characters, and made their first appearance at the Manchester Opera House during the live performance tour of Demon Days. The puppets could be seen sitting in a box high above the audience and would heckle the band, making comments about them in a similar way to Statler and Waldorf of Muppets fame. These puppets were most well known for being seen at this tour, though interestingly they missed one of the shows, as an event in Portugal overlapped. So to keep the illusion of Gorillaz being real characters alive, the puppets were only seen at one location that night, rather than being used at both, though eventually the puppets made their way to New York and came with an original set of dialogue, which can also be found on YouTube. But it wasn't only these events the puppets were seen at, and instead, they were used in a large variety of different ways back in the day, such as award ceremonies and promos. However, as the Phase 2 era came to an end, the puppets were slowly phased out of the band's facade, and never used in any promotional material again, which left fans asking the question, what happened to the puppets? A simple answer would be, they're probably in some kind of storage facility that the band owns, but we don't know for sure. The problem with physical items like this that are used for very specific content means that at some point they're probably going to be retired, and there isn't exactly a Gorillaz exhibit that exists for these to be on display at. Unfortunately, it's likely that unless they resurface from the band themselves, we'll never actually know where they've been hiding all these years, or what condition they're in. I couldn't find too much discussion about this online, with the exception of a comment that claims the 2D one has deteriorated over the years, but there's not a lot of evidence to support this theory. There have also been some sightings of what people believe were the puppets in old photos over the years, but it's more likely these were different models and something completely unrelated. Actually, this topic reminds me a little bit of the realistic looking puppets from the Wiggles that the internet loves to talk about for how horrifying they were back in the day. While nobody is exactly looking for these ones compared to gorillas, it is a curiosity of where they ended up, and in this case, we did get an answer. Apparently, the puppets of Greg, Anthony, and Murray deteriorated over the years to the point where they were beyond repair and do not exist anymore, whereas the Jeff puppet survived and was on public display in 2016. It was then returned to the Wiggles archive, but was photographed again in 2022, appearing to be in worse condition than before. Unfortunately, this is the fate of most of these creations, for the fact that they're not made to last or made with materials that can easily be preserved. It's possible this is a representation of the state of the Gorillaz puppets wherever they might be, but it's the fans that keep their legacy around, so maybe someday they'll make another appearance. I think one of the coolest aspects of them in general is the fact that they embody the older style in a way that was very experimental back then, when it came to interpreting the animated characters. In a way, if they were to show up again, it would feel like we were back in the Demon Days time. One of the first merchandise mysteries I ever made for the channel, and the video that many of my viewers told me they first watched when discovering my channel, was the mystery of the Chowder and Flapjack plushes. This mystery dates back to 2010, and to a company called Kelly Toy, who have become quite well known over the years for their Mario and Sonic plushes. However, in addition to those sets, they also produced a variety of Cartoon Network ones, many of which released in the mid and late 2000s, and covered quite a few popular shows. But as for Chowder and Flapjack, there were plans to release 2 full plush sets with many characters from the shows as part of that Cartoon Network license in the early 2010s. These photos are the only ones we have of the plushes, and they appear in a 2010 product catalog that was accessed from their online website, but they've never been seen in the wild, and that's led to the conclusion that they were cancelled before being produced. It's believed that they never came out, as a result of both shows ending on Cartoon Network at the time, so there'd be no need to make plush sets of them. We've never gotten an official word about it from Kelly Toy, so this is only speculation. But over the years, we have gotten some more insight about them, mostly from a photo of Kelly Toy's boardroom that was apparently posted to 4chan. Here, you can see all the characters in a variety of different sizes, so they did get pretty far in the development process, but the mystery remained when it came to their whereabouts. We know retail versions of the plushes were never released, even though people still claim that they've seen them at carnivals and other places like that, but there's never been proof of that, so these prototypes are really all that are known to exist. But with so many on the wall, and with Kelly Toy having since lost the license, we really don't know what happened to them. In the 13 years it's been since that photo was taken, none had resurfaced, and I started thinking that they were either all destroyed, or Cartoon Network has them stored in a warehouse or something. Until early 2023, when I got a message from a viewer on Twitter. Someone by the name of Hunter D messaged me and mentioned how they had seen the original Kelly Toy plush video and became fascinated with their history, wanting to get into collecting because of it. And it was then that they shared with me their biggest find to date. Unbelievably, I was sent a photo of the Kelly Toy Flapjack plush in hand. Hunter has one. I was so shocked at what I was seeing because I couldn't believe it actually existed, and I asked them how they found it, to which they replied it was a random eBay listing. Posted in December 2022, Hunter confirms that the eBay seller says they found the plush at an estate sale in California, which is where one of Kelly Toy's offices are located. Hunter happened to find the listing and bought it knowing what it was. The seller also apparently knew what they had, as the price tag of the plush was not cheap, and I have to wonder if those kinds of people end up finding my videos and pricing their items high because of that. There was a really clear shot of the classic Kelly Toy sample tag, which proves it's authentic, and definitely a prototype, not a retail released plush. And overall, I'm just so happy that one has survived and is now safe in Hunter's collection. I would love to know the story of who the guy was that ended up putting it out at the estate sale, or how it managed to leave Kelly Toy in the first place, but these details are pretty much impossible to find out. This also begs the question on if any of the other characters managed to escape, but only time will tell. I feel way more confident that we will see more of them show up now, and big thanks to Hunter for sharing this find with me. When you think of the first video game toy companies that hit the collecting scene, which ones come to mind? For me, Joyride Studios is always one of the first, for the fact that they covered so many different series, from Sonic to Mario, all in one line. But before that, BD&A was pretty popular with their Nintendo Collectibles series, and even earlier than that was Toy Biz with the video game Superstars. However, there is one video game toy company that predated all of the others, but isn't remembered by anyone, and barely released any products, because it never really got off the ground. But if it had, it could have become the first big video game toy producer. And because of this fact, there are indeed lost prototypes from this company. This is a story that dates back pretty far, to 2015, around the time I had purchased my Mario Kart 64 prototype from Toy Biz. While the topic isn't about Toy Biz, it's related to it in some way, because that Mario figure was not the first prototype I had come across on eBay. Earlier on in the summer, a listing went up for a boxed, unpainted Mario model claiming to be from a company called Avatar Creations. I had never heard of Avatar Creations before, or seen the sculpt of this particular figure. So before placing a bid on it, I messaged the seller to see what the story about it was. Apparently, the seller had been a former Avatar Creations employee named James, and through our conversation, I learned of this entire piece of video game toy history that I don't think anyone else in the community even knows about, still to this day. Avatar Creations was supposed to be a video game toy company that would have been the first to hit the American market as far back as the mid-1990s. They were a spin-off of Streamline Model Works, which is a model kit subsidiary of Streamline Pictures, the media company that dubbed anime. At that point, Avatar had done some very limited releases with video game companies, like the iconic Mega Man 8 promo statue with Capcom. But the bigger goal with Avatar was to venture into the toy market and release action figures based on video games. The Mario that was sold on eBay is the product of this original pitch, but there were several more characters made, including Tyrant from Resident Evil, Morrigan from Darkstalkers, and my favorite, Sonic. James had these photos from 2 decades ago, and to this day, I'm sure they're the only photos of these that still exist. But unfortunately for the company itself, it didn't really go anywhere, and was closed before any of the products were released, leaving all of the finished prototypes lost. And by the time we were finished talking, the auction had ended, which I never ended up bidding on, so with the insight that more figures existed, I was determined to try to find them, specifically that Sonic. James did inform me he currently owns the Tyrant, but has no idea where the others ended up, including the painted version of his Mario sculpt. So for the next couple years, I had gone on a pretty extensive search, looking for other people associated with Avatar Creations and Streamline Model Works, who might have worked on the prototypes. James did recall a few names of past employees who worked on the various characters, but unfortunately they weren't able to help me find the figures. I was also able to get in contact with the old president of Avatar Creations who oversaw all the work, thinking he would have some insight about the figures. But he too didn't seem to have any, and didn't even recall many of the details about them. But through a little more searching, I was able to come across one sculptor that had worked on some of the limited released content Avatar made, and through connecting with him, I was able to learn that out of everyone I've talked to, and anywhere these figures could be, he confirms he does have a box or two in his basement that contains some Avatar work, including a resin master of Sonic's head. He told me he'd dig out the boxes when he gets the chance, and I still check in with him every so often, but currently he hasn't been able to unearth the sculpts for me. Still, it's kind of amazing that even he still has all that work from such a small period of time, close to 20 years ago. And with the exception of anything that might be forgotten in those boxes, these might be the only Avatar Creations prototypes left in existence. Sonic's head, Tyrant, and the unpainted Mario. I'm really glad to have even been able to find someone that has any kind of archive for this content, and if I ever get more word on the status of those archives, I'll make a segment about it in another merchandise video. For now though, I'm still glad that some piece of Sonic is still around. When it comes to merchandise and the products that get released, most people don't think about the behind the scenes work that goes into them, or even some of the products that never came out and were cancelled before they were made. While I don't talk about SpongeBob merchandise that often, I am somewhat familiar with the old products that were released in the early 2000s, because I had a lot of them growing up. I was a big SpongeBob fan even back then, and ended up getting a lot of the toys. But back then, and even nowadays, I never thought too much about the history behind their development, or what might not have been released that I never could have got in the first place. Well, thanks to one user who is dedicated to SpongeBob products, and one artist who was kind enough to share their portfolio with us, we get to see for the first time all kinds of behind the scenes development history and cancelled items for some of that old merchandise. These photos and information came to me from Rip Rod Monkey Man, who received them from artist Jonathan Wright while creating for Colorbach in the early 2000s. That was the company who was making the SpongeBob stuff, and now we can share them here today. These are a variety of early prototypes, concept drawings, and pre-production sculpts for some of their products. One of my favorite images to look at are the pre-production SpongeBob plushes that came in 4 different sizes, and featured a much different looking face than the plushes that ended up releasing. The final ones definitely look more show accurate, but these ones almost look like concept art, and have got to be some of, if not the first plushes ever created for the character. But there's also an unreleased large SpongeBob with removable pants and shoes, which never came out as intended, but there are Colorbach plushes that do feature removable pants. There's even more documents that show unreleased products, some of which seem even cooler than the ones that came out. One of my favorites are the bendy figure variants that feature the characters with their bubble helmets from the show, and concept art to go with them. While some bendy figures did release, I love the specific detail that heavily references when they're in Sandy's tree dome. And speaking of direct show references, there's another unreleased bendy figure of SpongeBob with his weight set from the pilot. That's an awesome figure to see. There's also a figure with a functional bubble wand, and an entire SpongeBob that can hold bubble formula inside of him. In addition to some more novelty products like soap on a rope, pens with figures inside, and a water game. Some of these novelty products did come out, but they were different from the concept art seen here. Another interesting feature to point out is that Plankton is nowhere to be seen in any of these products. Jonathan explained that was because Plankton wasn't established yet, so he was excluded. And I also think it would have been hard to scale him with merchandise like this, given his size. It's also noted that the majority of these sketched products never even got physical prototypes made, as a lot of it was just conceptual, and Jonathan had extremely limited source material to pull ideas from at the time. So you might be asking yourself at this point, as I did after getting all these pictures, where exactly the prototypes ended up, and if there's any way to preserve them. Well, the short answer to that question is we don't know, so currently they're all lost. Jonathan Wright confirmed that he doesn't know what happened to them, and I'd never seen any in all my time looking for merchandise or prototypes either. However, from my experience with video game prototype merchandise in the past, I know that it heavily depends on the company itself. Some companies will just let prototypes go into the wild or be sold on eBay, others will recycle the materials and reuse them in other projects, and some will just hold on to them at the company for archival and never let them go. It's possible that some of these did find their way out to the public and were bought by private collectors years ago, but there's no way to verify that unless someone comes forward with one. I don't know a whole lot about the history of SpongeBob merchandise collecting, so I can't say for sure, but again from my experience with video game merchandise, the big prototype boom of that category only started taking off in the late 2010s, so there's a chance these SpongeBob ones just haven't been found yet. Funny enough, modified versions of the Colorbach products appeared in Patchy's room, in the episode The Sponge Who Could Fly, so even these original screen-used props are considered lost too. I would love to get one of those early plushes, so I'll be on the lookout for any that might resurface or information on where to find one. Since music isn't a topic that comes up too often on my channel, I've never really expressed just how big of a Fall Out Boy fan I was back then. But if you guys knew me back in high school, you'd know me as the kid who was obsessed. I remember my introduction to the band came about by accident too. I went to one of my cousin's graduations back then, and they were playing Thanks for the Memories over the speakers. I felt like I had heard that song somewhere before, so I checked it out on YouTube a while later, and the rest is history. They became the first band that I really followed and researched, which led me to come across so many cool releases over the years. Some of the first rarities I uncovered were the Evening Out With Your Girlfriend EP, which actually had 2 different releases, and the Project Rocket Fall Out Boy Split EP. Neither of these are too obscure anymore, and I would say they're at the most basic level of rare releases. More interestingly, there existed a director's cut of Take This to Your Grave with bonus content and different album art, as well as a release of Folie à Deux with alternate art. I've always loved the cover of this album, but wished it had come in a blue variant, since blue is my favorite color. And well, apparently one does exist. It was a UK exclusive release on a web store called play.com. A Discogs listing was the only evidence of its existence online, and at the time, there weren't any in-hand pictures of it, just a stock photo of the artwork that used a blue background. For years I thought this mock-up was all that existed for the blue variant, and that the actual album would have remained red. I scoured eBay UK hoping that one would show up, and eventually it did. This listing used a stock photo as well, and it wasn't even the blue variant, but the normal red one instead. The only evidence that it came from Play.com was the title claiming that's the one it was. I figured it was a risk worth taking, as even if it was the red version, I'd have my answer that a physical blue variant never existed, and I might never find another copy again to test out the theory anyway. I ended up winning the bid, and got the CD weeks later, and to my surprise, it was actually the blue variant. The album itself retains the red color, but the slipcase on the outside is colored blue, and to this day, the album is one of my favorite pieces in my CD collection. However, there's a different album from Fall Out Boy that I also wanted to get for my collection that came out around the Folie à Deux era, but to this day, I've never found a copy. If you followed Fall Out Boy and the Decay Dance record label back in the day, you might remember a huge collaboration album that was released, called Citizens Fob Mixtape, Welcome to the New Administration. This album contained dozens of songs, snippets, and demos from a variety of bands and their upcoming content, making it quite a famous release within the community. For something that's called a mixtape, I was always under the impression that it had actually been released as one, and back in the day, I searched quite a bit for this rarity, not being aware that its main release was a free digital download. However, I wasn't completely wrong in my assumption that a physical release was made. Eventually, I came upon a Discogs listing and discovered a note about it that states, "This album was never pressed commercially. Very limited copies were produced on a printable CDR with special artwork to be given away for radio contest." In all my years of searching for Fall Out Boy CDs, I've never come across a copy of this radio promo, and I've never even heard about it getting a physical release from any other source. Not too long ago, I even made a tweet asking if anyone had seen it, and a few people from the Fall Out Boy community weren't even aware of this release themselves. It's interesting that the note on Discogs would even make mention of special artwork, as that would suggest someone must have seen it, or have a source of where the artwork came from. It would make for an easy identifier if one was to resurface as well. This listing on Discogs is specifically for the radio promo, and apparently 6 people own it. I'm skeptical of this claim, for the fact that you can add items to your collection on the site without any way to verify you actually own them. Though in the past when I've asked users to share images of rare releases with me, the messages are ignored, so maybe this isn't too surprising. Moving back to the topic of plushes, if you watched one of my older video game lost media videos, you saw the discovery and archival of a cancelled Deku Link plush from ToySite. The Deku Link was mentioned once in a single line of text, but hadn't been seen in 22 years, with myself having doubts that it existed at all, until an eBay listing showed up from a Goodwill in Seattle, proving a prototype was created. This topic is similar to that, in which it discusses more Zelda plushes, though in a different way. Still, these are pieces of physical lost media that I really didn't think we'd ever see again, and were possibly destroyed over 20 years ago when they first appeared. One of the more popular areas of collecting within the video game merchandise community are the old Japanese UFO plushes that could only be won from UFO catchers or crane games for a short period of time. You've probably seen some of these plushes in passing before, such as the Star Fox set, Kirby's Adventure set, and Sonic the Fighter set. There were dozens of different franchises represented in this way, and even though it took a while, Zelda eventually was too, with the release of Ocarina of Time, and it's this picture where the mystery really begins. While we know of and have found dozens of plushes of the characters in these pictures, what's interesting about them is the ones shown here are prototypes of the ones that actually came out, earlier versions that differ from the ones you could obtain. Specifically in the case of Ocarina of Time, there are many differences between the prototype plushes and the final versions, including color of fabric, accessory placements, and even the patterns themselves. This is important because collectors love getting their hands on these alternate versions of released products, and oftentimes only one or two exist, making them holy grails. However, what's different between the prototypes from Toy Site and these ones is that they're Japanese. Not only is the process of obtaining prototypes quite difficult when you're dealing with US products, but Japanese ones are exceptionally rarer. Not only is there a language barrier involved with finding Japanese prototypes to begin with, but the Japanese companies seem to have a better lock on them. In my 15 years of collecting video game merchandise, I have only seen one example of UFO plush prototypes in someone's hands: Yoshi's Story plush straps. While the green, pink, light blue, and yellow colors did release, I have never come across the dark blue, red, black, and white colors before, with the exception of this single image. I found it on a Japanese GeoCities page back in 2018, from a collector who described them as being from the manufacturer, but it was never explained what exactly they were, though all signs point towards them being prototypes. And now, we can add another UFO plush prototype to the list of finds, as those early Zelda plushes from the original photo suddenly resurfaced on Yahoo Japan without warning, and having gone almost completely under the radar. This listing is from September 2022, and contains the original prototype plushes of Zelda, Young Link, and Ganondorf from the original photo. At first, I was skeptical these were the same ones, and maybe they were from a different build. But after comparing the two, you can definitely see the similarities. Specifically, in the way Zelda's face is shaped, the position of Young Link's facial features, and the shape and color of Ganondorf's head and hair. Though if there were any doubts, you can see the plushes themselves are even tagged with information and a production date. This is always fun to see, and the Deku Link from eBay was tagged in a similar way. This auction also includes a Young Link that hasn't been completely finished yet. I've never seen anything like this, even in the years before I was collecting. But it's the auction details that really make my head spin, because it's crazy to think that this resurfaced in such a quiet way. The title of the listing makes no mention of them being prototypes at all, and the description only has one passing mention that the products are a sample and may differ from the final version. Which is funny to think about, because unless you knew these were prototypes to begin with, you might otherwise think they're regular plushes. There's also no backstory about where they came from, or how the seller acquired them, and the seller themselves doesn't seem to have anything else out of the ordinary for sale. And now the price, which is something I know everyone is curious about. They only sold for 272,000 yen, which is around $1,800 US with the current conversion rate. Had this been a few years ago, when the yen wasn't as weak as it is now, this would have been closer to 2,500, which is still lower than I would have expected. People will pay close to $1,000 just for a final release Ganondorf, so I figured a sample of him would go for close to 2,000 alone, on top of the fact that you get 3 other plushes in the lot. It's definitely a weird set of circumstances to have all come together at once, and while it seems unlikely we'll never get the full story on how these resurfaced, the fact that they did is good enough for me, and knowing that these items, thought to be lost or destroyed, are still around, keeps the idea of preserving them alive. Unfortunately, however, this isn't the full set, as Adult Link and Darunia were not part of the listing, but are seen in the original photo and did have a final release, which technically means the set is only partially found. I'm really curious how the seller was able to acquire these three, but somehow not the other two. Hopefully one day we can see the whole set reunited. This next topic relates directly to that old school era of UFO plushes from the late 90s and early 2000s. It's a topic that I came across by accident, but has been on my mind occasionally ever since, for the mystery that surrounds them. There have been a few times in the past where I've bought plushes just because of how cool or sometimes strange the characters look, despite never having played the games they're from, like Seaman and Rent-A-Hero. But at some point in searching for obscure video game plushes like these, I came across one set that seems to have never been released, but could just be so rare that's not entirely the case. I don't even remember how I came across these originally, but there were a couple different old Japanese websites that were advertising upcoming products from back in the early 2000s, and one of these items happened to be a series of plushes from the arena fighter Power Stone by Capcom. I don't know anything about the game, or even much about the characters at all, but these plushes have a really cool style to them, and look great, so they would be nice additions to my collection. However, that's easier said than done, because in all the years I've first seen pictures of these plushes, I've never seen them for sale before. This image, sourced from a Japanese website, states that they're supposed to be coming out at the end of 1999. Sega Enterprises Co. Ltd. held an exhibition to promote new prizes for the 99 year-end sales season to interested parties. These new prices are products exclusively for amusement facilities nationwide, and can only be obtained at prize machines such as UFO Catcher. I'm not sure if any of the other sets shown here actually released, but there's nothing indicating that the Power Stone plushes actually did come out. My long-standing theory has always been that they were cancelled before being made, but I don't have any evidence to prove that, other than the fact that I've never seen them outside of this image, but that's not a very solid theory. It's possible that they did release in such small quantities or are so obscure they rarely show up for sale. Just recently, I was looking for some Hunter x Hunter plushes from the original UFO set, and only came across the four main characters from the series in almost every photo I looked at, believing that those were the only ones that were made. This was until I found the whole set advertised at a UFO prize event similar to the Power Stone ones, and noticed that Hisoka was in the back, bumping the set up to 5 characters. He's not even shown on the tag, so I had no idea he was in the set. But again, I speculated he might have been cancelled before release, since I had never seen one. Though apparently that wasn't the case, and an in-hand photo appeared proving he came out. And after a more detailed search with this knowledge, if we could find a single in-hand photo of any Power Stone plushes, that would prove they were released. But until one shows up, I'm going to believe they were cancelled, since I couldn't find any other information about them. This next topic takes us to a completely different side of collecting, involving anime merchandise rather than video game stuff. While I always feel like I've been too dedicated to video game merchandise collecting to have time or resources to spend on anime merchandise, as I find myself getting back into Naruto and Bleach from my childhood, it's also a lot of fun buying all the new figures that are surprisingly still being made. And while reliving my original Naruto fandom, I found myself going back to take a closer look at the action figure line Mattel made in 2006 as part of the original series from when it was airing on Cartoon Network. This line had a wide variety of characters that hold up pretty well to this day. A lot of people like to criticize this line for its sculpts and gimmicky action features, but the original characters from the set, like Orochimaru, Iruka, and Zabuza, really stand out. They're the only posable figures of these characters that have ever been made, and it's unlikely such characters will ever be revisited. For that reason, I love the line, so I started researching more of it, and once having gone down the Mattel Naruto rabbit hole, you can find some hidden gems, and of course, lost media. There are some really limited figures that I had never even seen as a kid, like Curse Mark Sasuke and Lotus Kick Rock Lee. But then there are a few others that seem to have been cancelled, like Lightning Blade Kakashi and Claw Attack Gaara. The only photos of them that exist are from Toy Fair. There's also a Jirobo that never came out and can only be seen on the back of a box, though all three characters have resurfaced as test shots over the years. But while doing all this research on Mattel Naruto figures, I came across a Reddit thread showcasing another figure I had never seen before, but it was the title of it that really caught my attention. It was called The Rarest Official Naruto Figures in Existence, only 2 ever made, and contains a photo showing 2 boxed Naruto figures with the 9-tailed fox chakra, marked as being from Wizard World and Comic-Con 2006. The user who posted these, named Shogunnian, provided some details about what these were, stating, "They were given out by Mattel as lottery prizes during SDCC and Wizard World in 2006, 1 for each convention. Naruto's eyes and the Kyuubi chakra eyes are actual rubies. The Naruto figure is the same mold as the standard Mattel Naruto, but with a different face. The Kyuubi mold was never reproduced." More of the story surrounding these figures is revealed in the thread. Apparently, the 2 winners of these figures both sold them off in 2006, not fully knowing how rare and perhaps valuable they were. And Shogunnian confirms that they were only able to acquire them as a result of hearing about the figures beforehand and actively sought them out around the time of these conventions. I wish I could find the official announcement for these. I remember them being featured in an issue of Shonen Jump magazine in 2006, but I'm not sure which issue it was. As far as I know, that was the only time they were ever mentioned. And this is where the search begins. We know for certain that the figures exist. They were both resold, and as of this thread from 4 years ago, are still with Shogunnian. So the mystery isn't about what happened to the figures, but rather where the original advertisement is mentioning them. As mentioned in the original thread, the advertisement for the figures was allegedly seen in a Shonen Jump from 2006, but unfortunately, I only had a few issues from that year. Still, it would be worth looking through my copies before purchasing new issues, in case I just don't remember seeing it. But I flipped through them and didn't see anything mentioning the Mattel figures. The September issue, strangely, even advertises a contest to win Mattel figures right next to Naruto's head. But there isn't anything that mentions figures in this issue either. I even looked through the manga pages where they sometimes insert extra content, and even checked the mail-away card in the front, but didn't find anything useful. I have no idea what this headline is in reference to, but after coming up empty-handed, I asked for some help from someone on Twitter who has a complete collection of Shonen Jumps to look through, and even they came up empty-handed. It appears as though the announcement for this figure was not from a Shonen Jump, and with that conclusion, I'm not sure where else to begin searching for it. There were a few different anime magazines that were released in 2006, so it could have been in any of them. But without even a date to begin at, you'd have to search the first 6 months of every magazine, given how the conventions took place over the summer. If you've ever seen an advertisement for the Ruby Eye Naruto figures, be sure to let me know. Here's a topic that I've actually discussed in another video quite a while ago, but there wasn't any new information that came from it, and the mystery continues to this day. For as much as I liked Fall Out Boy and New Found Glory in high school, I admittedly stopped listening to them shortly after I graduated. For that reason, you could argue that the search for this release has been going on for longer, and out of all the lost CDs that I wish I had in my collection, this one might be my most desired. Unlike the popular bands that everyone is familiar with, I was into my fair share of lesser-known artists, which seems to happen with the more time you spend listening to a certain genre. For me, pop punk is that genre. So back in the day, I came across a lot of bands in this way, like the White Tie Affair and the topic of this segment, Hit the Lights. While I don't really listen to those bands anymore, I do have a lot of memories getting into their music and how it stuck with me in the years following high school. So I went hard trying to collect all their releases, and have obtained quite a few rarities. This includes their 2009 EP From Coast to Coast, and a sealed copy of a compilation From Ohio with Love, which eluded me for years. But there was another album that dates back to the beginning of the band's existence, and around the same time From Ohio with Love came out, their very first EP, called Leaving Town Tonight. I don't know if it's the simplicity of the album art, the release date being so far in the past, or the title which takes its name from one of the tracks. But there's something about this release that I've always found myself obsessed with. It's such a forgotten and obscure release that back when I first discovered it existed, there was almost nothing about it online. There wasn't even a listing for it on Discogs. I'm the one that added it. There isn't too much known about its release either. I've heard rumors that it was given out at some of the band's earliest shows, but haven't found any evidence of that, though it's likely that's how it was distributed. However, if that was the case, it might date the release to 2003, since that was the year the band formed, contrary to its release year being 2004, which is what's passed around online. I can't even remember how I originally discovered this existed, but back when I began looking for a copy, there were some track listings and album art from sites like last.fm, which are only good for listening and not buying. Though it doesn't appear that there's anything notable about the tracks in this EP, as interestingly, they appear to be the same ones that can be found on From Ohio with Love, and again, when it comes to tracking down a copy of this, years ago I would make consistent searches for Hit the Lights CDs on eBay, hoping one would show up, but it never did. My copies of Until We Get Caught and From Coast to Coast actually came from a big Hit the Lights collection that someone had, but Leaving Town Tonight wasn't in it. I even messaged the user on Discogs, who appears to be the only person on the site that owns a copy, but I never heard anything back from them. Again, there's no verification process to prove you own what you add to your collection, so they might not even have it. I had also messaged the frontman of the band, Colin Ross, on Facebook and asked for more details about it, including a number of copies that are in existence, but he only read my message and never responded. Colin left the band after the release of their first album, only having recorded some demos for their second, so it's not unreasonable to assume he wouldn't have any insight since it was so long ago. That's something I always find interesting about early EPs like this. The information about their existence must have gotten online somehow, so it's a mystery what the source is. I made that Discogs listing not only because it bothered me that the EP wasn't on the site, but also hoping that someone would come forward with a copy to sell, and so far, no one has. I think it's time we put in some lost merchandise into the video, because those topics are fun to talk about, and I know a lot of my viewers are interested in that kind of search. And this is one that I actually wanted to talk about months ago, but couldn't fit it into any of my videos at the time. But now is the perfect opportunity to ask if anyone has seen the monster cereal busts. Now, I didn't even know these existed, or that they were lost, but after coming across them last October when searching for Halloween topics, I got really curious as to where they ended up, assuming they're still in existence at all. This story takes us all the way back to October 2020, when General Mills ran a one-of-a-kind contest to give away their iconic monster cereal characters to the fans, in the form of 20-inch busts. On the General Mills website, there's a page detailing this contest, which is still up to this day, showcasing the busts, detailing the contest, and giving you all kinds of pictures and videos that depict the creation process of these statues. Each bust was sculpted by special effects artist Carly Morse, and each one would be given away to a different fan, simply by entering the contest, and it couldn't be any easier to enter. All you had to do was visit the General Mills Instagram page, like the post about the contest, and comment which monster cereal is your favorite, using the hashtag MonsterCerealSweepstakes. Depending on your answer, this is probably how they decided which bust would go to which person. But currently, we have no idea where any of them ended up. When I first discovered this topic, I was really hoping to find a picture of them in someone's collection or get someone talking about them in a YouTube video, but I couldn't find anything about the winners of these. The post only got around 18,000 likes, which means there were only that many people who could have won them, as you had to like the post to be entered into the contest. Even though at the time, the contest seems like it was written about and promoted on a bunch of different websites. So it's not like this was something that not a lot of people knew about. It did make the headlines. But just like all seasonal content similar to this, it appears as though once Halloween ended, that was also kind of the end of people caring about these, so the news runs dry after that, and there are no other leads to pursue. What's most interesting to me about the whole topic is that it just seems like one of those things that would have shown up by now, if either the winner didn't want theirs and tried to sell it, hoping to get some cash out of it, or if the actual winners wanted to show it off in their collection or to other cereal fans. And that's exactly what happened, for one of the statues anyway. When I told user Rabbit Corridor about this topic, they decided to click around the General Mills post from Instagram and came upon the winner of the Frankenberry bust, who proudly photographed themselves with it and showed a few new angles. This dates all the way back from when the contest was first held, and it proves that one of the busts made it to a happy fan, but the whereabouts of the other two are still unknown. Apparently back then, people were trying to find out who won them, with some discussion in the comments that mentions the names of the winners having been released at some point. While there's no clear answer on if they were released digitally, General Mills did state you could mail in a request to receive a list of the winners, which no doubt would tell you for certain who won them, but unfortunately, this offer expired in November 2020, and even with that list of names, it would probably be pretty unlikely to track them down unless they also use their real name in their social media profiles. In fact, I can't imagine that many cereal eaters at all would actually enter this kind of contest to win something like this. You probably would have had to have been a big fan or a collector to even do that. I did look on WorthPoint for any mention of them having been resold, but I couldn't find anything about that. I even thought to check the comments of the videos General Mills posted to YouTube about them, one of which had over 300,000 views. But somehow, all the comments got deleted at one point, so there's nothing to see. General Mills has done other monster cereal contests since this one, like the Cause collaboration from a couple years ago, which I did enter and won the minifigures from, but they've never done anything like these busts again. There were thousands of these little figures made, and you can easily find people selling them on eBay. While I'm not a cereal collector, each one of these busts does look really cool, and I hope they're still being enjoyed by someone, or at least still in one piece. I think the worry with this kind of item is how they're literally one of one, and if anything was to happen to them, that would basically erase them from existence. I also want to mention this small update with another search, since it's not a huge find, but a lot of viewers did enjoy following it. In another video from not too long ago, I ran into a contest from the 2020 Halloween season that involved some lost merchandise that hadn't been seen since the promotion was held. Back in 2020, General Mills ran a contest that was unlike anything they had ever done before, and haven't done since. They hired a special effects artist to create busts of each monster cereal character, Boo Berry, Count Chocula, and Frankenberry, with each bust only having one unit made. But because the contest was held so long ago, and only one unit of each character was made, it raised the question of where these could have ended up, and if they still exist, because I certainly hadn't come across them before. Upon doing a little research, I didn't come up with any results of the winners having made posts about their prizes. And with rare limited items like these, it's unfortunate to think about the reality if something was to happen to them, or if they end up getting lost. Basically that's it, you'll never get another one. We see this constantly with the likes of lost plushes and action figures, but anyway, for the busts, we got a nice update on one of the characters right after the video went up. Now in the video, I mentioned that I couldn't find any of the winners, but then was sent a picture of a winner posing with Frankenberry from around the time the contest ended, as I was actually editing the segment. I don't believe he was ever contacted about if he still owned it, but it was nice to get some kind of evidence that it was in the hands of a happy fan. But now as for the update, we did get news on Boo Berry, when a couple users on X, who were somehow familiar with the winner, told me that they believed he might have this one. A couple pictures later, and I was able to confirm they were the original winner, and to this day, still own Boo Berry, who was dressed in a Christmas hat in this photo. This makes me really happy to know that he's such a focal point within the family. But that's where we stand on this search, with Count Chocula still being totally unaccounted for, and no word on if the winner of Frankenberry still has him either. Just like with most of these types of items, As awareness spreads, so does the likelihood that they'll resurface, even when time isn't necessarily on your side. When it comes to collecting, most of us prefer the smaller sized items like figures and statues that you can display on a table or shelf and enjoy from any part of the room. Of course, figures range in size from small to 1/6 or even 1/4 scale, but for the most part they're contained to a small amount of space overall. However, that might not be big enough for some people, and those people might want something larger, like a life-size statue, or better yet, a realistic prop taken right out of your favorite cartoon that is so unrealistically big you can't even store it in your house. Though there is a catch here, because with a bigger size comes a bigger price tag, and the bigger price tag means there's less potential buyers out there that would spend the money on that kind of thing. This notion gets into a series of extremely wild and strange items that Cartoon Network and Adult Swim had for sale back in the 2000s on their websites, that to this day have remained elusive in the community for what exactly the items were and how cool it would have actually been to see these in person. The only problem is, we've never actually seen them in person and have no idea if anyone even bought them in the first place when they were available, with few records of them having even been for sale in the first place. This is where the mystery begins with some pretty crazy items. In November 2003, 20 years ago, Cartoon Network ran a holiday promotion on their website called the Ultimate Holiday Wish List, with the tagline, "If you're gonna wish, wish big." And wow did they deliver on that, featuring a specific section on their website's shop dedicated to the biggest, craziest, and most expensive purchases you could make, with a total of 6 documented items any consumer could buy. The first one and most normal of the bunch is none other than Space Ghost's desk from Space Ghost Coast to Coast. This is a replica of the iconic desk that the character uses in his show, and it can be yours for only $40,000. If you read the description, it tells you a little bit more about the product, like how the desktop is self-illuminated, and mood lighting that is built into the overhang. The chair itself is decked out too, with a massage system and push-button adjustability. Not only that, but they also list a whole bunch of features not seen in the photo, and even use some brand names, stating, a 15-inch Philips LCD television pops up seamlessly from the desktop. A Sony Dream system supplies the built-in sound, and a mini fridge is furnished. The desk includes ports for computer hookups and AC power outlets. A cordless telephone is also provided. It actually looks really cool and sounds like an awesome piece of memorabilia to have. But despite this, it seems to be too far out of the price point for even fans of the show. Some discussion about this item from the Toon Zone forums can be found online, mentioning how they'd laugh at anyone who spent the money on it, and even accused OP of having photoshopped the item themselves. Now, when these items have come up for discussion in the past, most people shared this feeling towards them, that they weren't actually sold and the whole thing was a joke played by Cartoon Network. While the images used are indeed mock-ups and don't show a final product, it's likely these were going to be made to order, which is why real images don't exist. This is exactly the same case for the other items being offered in this promotion, like the giant Ed, Edd and Eddy Gumball machine, the Dexter and Powerpuff Girls room makeovers, and the Harvey Birdman car, though this one does say only one will be made in the listing. But if there was ever a product from this list that was believed to be fake, it wouldn't be the desk or the chair, or even the car, and instead, it would be the real-life Kids Next Door treehouse for $1 million. Out of all these products, it's the treehouse that's become the most well-known over the years, for its ridiculousness and price tag, and was even a highlight in the Cartoon Network commercial that ran on TV for this promotion.
Everything on the Cartoon Network Ultimate Holiday Wish List. We started training, but it's not all ho-ho-ho. It's hard work. Now, Scooby-Doo movie packs, Powerpuff Girl cosmetic sets, no problem. But some of these things take 8 of us just to get in the sleigh. Yeah, just go online and buy a real made-to-order 5-room Kids Next Door treehouse.
Shop the Ultimate Holiday Wish List on CartoonNetwork.com. If you're going to wish, wish big.
According to the description from the website, it contains a gaming station, state-of-the-art entertainment center, and literally every other amenity under the sun, it says. And the commercial that advertised the treehouse specifically mentions it has 5 rooms, and was indeed made to order, so that does add more likelihood to the idea all of these were only made if someone bought them. In the old Rebel Taxi video that showed these listings off, and gave them the attention they have today, he shows more of the description for the treehouse, which gets into construction details and furnishings. But like I mentioned previously, there are no records of anyone having bought these items, despite the discussions that occurred on various forums from back when they were first put up. The Harvey Birdman car even made its way to a Volkswagen forum that apparently a lot of Adult Swim fans were using at the time, but nothing about the car was ever mentioned after that. The only records we have that relate to the acknowledgement of these items from Cartoon Network was a comment from the senior marketing director of the company, who mentioned in an interview that a few people were interested in the Kids Next Door treehouse, but funding fell through for the fact that they were 10 years old. Followed by a tweet from Adult Swim that said Space Ghost bought the desk. Both of these were collected from back a few years ago when Rebel Taxi was researching the topic. So while it does seem unlikely for these items to have been made, the craziness ramps up from here, as we look at a couple more items that are not remembered or as well known as the Cartoon Network ones. Now, you could argue that despite the high price tag of the Kids Next Door treehouse, it is a functional play area that kids would have a fun time in, or even that a $70,000 car would be cool to drive around. But meanwhile, a few years later, Adult Swim decided to revisit the ultimate holiday wishlist idea and created a couple new products of their own for potential buyers to purchase. Like I said, these are documented and discussed far less than the holiday items, and as far as I could tell, were not released as part of a holiday, promotion, or any specific reason. I guess Adult Swim just wanted to see if there were any fans big enough out there to purchase these items, and they are, without a doubt, way sillier and less useful than anything Cartoon Network was offering. In 2010, Adult Swim made a listing on their official web store for a replica death clock fountain from their show Metalocalypse. Similar to the Cartoon Network listings, this one is complete with a mock-up illustration showing the fountain in the show, rather than a physical item, and has a price tag of $40,000. The description goes really hard to sell the item, asking if you are the world's biggest Metalocalypse fan, no really, their biggest fan, and that nothing will boast your dedication to animated death metal more than this disgustingly lavish and entirely unnecessary conversation piece. Well hey, at least they acknowledge it's unnecessary. Since the photo is from the cartoon, it shows the fountain full of blood, and I was wondering if they were actually going to use some kind of fake blood substitute in place of water which fountains usually spout, but it just says the blood isn't included, or any shipping costs. I'm sure they probably would just use water, but even so, imagine if someone bought this and actually put it in their front yard. There probably would have been some kind of local news story just about complaints from the neighbors alone. There's also a $13,000 deposit showing that you actually want to buy the item. Though contrary to the Cartoon Network items, Adult Swim does do a better job outright stating, "Seriously, this is real," in one of the bullet points, and has a separate contact page for serious inquiries. Considering the age demographic of Adult Swim fans, I'm sure they got a lot of memesters messaging them about it, only to make jokes. This is also proven by the fact that there are 39 people who left meme reviews on the item to pretend like they actually purchased it. The irony here is that if someone did buy it and left a real review, we'd never know that with all the fake ones. But then there's the item that is the most unbelievable and most pointless out of all of these attempts by Cartoon Network to make something crazy and expensive for the consumer, and that is indeed the thumbnail of this video. Imagine walking down the street, seeing a giant shadow overhead, then you look up and see Meatwad's goofy face staring back down at you. When you then proceed to ask yourself, what the heck is that? Maybe in some alternate reality that could have happened, if someone purchased the Aqua Teen Hunger Force Meatwad hot air balloon. This was posted around the same time as the Death Clock Fountain, but costs $30,000 more, for a total of $70,000. Similar to the fountain, it too has a contact page for serious inquiries only, and even directly mentions the fountain, pointing out that this balloon is even more nuts, and that's the truth. The Meatwad balloon measures 90,000 cubic feet in size, is custom made by Head Balloons Company, and comes with a piloted 1-hour ride anywhere in the US. You get to keep the balloon afterwards, but unlike the fountain, this is literally an airborne vehicle and comes with so many more liabilities that have to be addressed in the listing. It mentions that to pilot the item yourself, you need to have insurance, a license, and everything official like that. And also that you have to sign a waiver before going on the 1-hour piloted ride. Interestingly, there is no deposit on this one, but it says it's non-refundable. It's so wacky to think about buying an airborne vehicle from a TV block that airs goofy cartoons late at night, but I guess that's part of the whole meme of this. The description again alludes to the fact that you must be a huge fan with a lot of money to waste to even buy this, but apparently there were a lot of people like that back in 2010 because 10 people reviewed the balloon and their experience riding in it. Actually, there's even one reviewer who claimed to have bought 3 of them and saved money by bundling, so I guess that means there are more than 10 of these in existence, right? Next, you're gonna tell me someone proposed to their fiancé in one of these. Could you imagine the story you'd have to tell your kids? But jokes aside, similar to the previous items mentioned in this video, there are no photos that we know of showing finalized or released products for these Adult Swim items that someone bought and owns. Like I said before, because these were so ridiculous and seemingly made to order, Cartoon Network and Adult Swim were not going to invest the money into a prototype or sample if they thought nobody was actually going to buy them in the first place. It's also for this reason that we can believe no physical creations for any of these products ever existed, and they're only dreams on paper. In fact, the closest confirmation we can get to that comes from Adult Swim themselves, who made a promo advertising the Meatwad balloon when the listing went up. The commercial begins by showing the Death Clock fountain and asking the viewers if they remember it, stating that of course no one would because no one bought it, and then proceeds to show the Meatwad balloon in the sky over the fountain. However, it's very possible that someone did buy one of these at one point and just never posted about it. The Ed and Eddie Gumball machine feels like it's priced reasonably low enough for someone to have bought, and even the fountain could have been used in a backyard or garden at someone's house. While these were technically limited time items and weren't available for years and years, if you look at the listings on the Wayback Machine and go to the furthest capture, the Cartoon Network items were still up in August 2004, and the Adult Swim ones could still be bought in March 2012, with new reviews having been posted in February of that year. Maybe somebody saw the promo that mentioned nobody bought the fountain, and one was bought after it aired. I guess the question really comes down to whether or not there were any big enough fans of these shows to have spent the money on memorabilia from them, or if they did, if they have any idea that these are actually so elusive. Back when these were put up for sale, if someone had bought them, it probably wouldn't have felt like a big deal, having been long before social media and the real impact of cartoon nostalgia nowadays. There could be someone out there that has one of these in their home and just never talked about it, or thought twice to share that aspect of their childhood. Though Rebel Taxi also made a good point in his original video, that if someone did purchase one of these items, there probably would have been a whole PR event about it, complete with commercials and everything. Especially with Adult Swim, that's something so crazy I could imagine them doing. But I'm not sure if this theoretical PR would have only been for the higher priced items and not the smaller priced ones like the desk or the car, but it's something to consider. I would love to come across someone that has at least one of these items, but until that happens, their creation will remain a mystery. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to check out some of my other Lost Media videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, Finn.